How is US foreign policy set to evolve over the next 4 years under a Biden presidency? And how will relations with Africa change, if at all? Well, joining me to discuss this topic is Chester Crocker, who's Professor of Strategic Studies at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Professor Crocker is also the former US Assistant Secretary of State to Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Chester, welcome to the CRA channel. Could you give us a sense of how domestic politics has changed in the US after this election, but also more broadly in terms of international affairs?
Thank you, David. Good to be with you. I think one important starting point is to recognize that the USA is a troubled country with lots of significant domestic problems that relate not only to the COVID crisis, but also more generally to the economic impact of the COVID crisis. And of course, a lot of the tensions that have been very much in the news in the last few years. We are a polarized country. And the number one job for President-elect Biden and his team is going to be to address the American domestic crisis, if I can put it that way, and it really is a crisis, and to begin charting a fresh course and addressing some of the most immediate challenges which are related to the pandemic and to the economic implications of the pandemic in order to get the necessary fiscal stimulus into the hands of Americans who are most challenged by the impact of the pandemic on jobs and incomes. So what I'm saying is that foreign policy is not the basis for Biden's victory, and it may not be the number one priority coming out of the starting gate. But I think you will see some very significant changes on a global basis, a rejoining of global institutions in a constructive way, focusing on, for example, returning to the Paris Climate Accord, that sort of thing, maybe figuring out what we can do with the Iran nuclear deal. There's talk of strengthening our participation in international institutions such as the UN and various UN agencies like the WHO and so forth. You'll also see a much strengthened focus on our alliance relationships in Asia and Europe, and an effort to undo the damage of the Trump years and to signal very clearly that we are a member of some critically important global alliances, and we're going to play our proper role, not as a dictator, but as a leading member of both NATO and the alliance relationships we have in Asia. So that will be clear. I think another dimension that has implications for Africa, but is a global point, is that we will make clear our preference for the norms and principles of good governance and democracy. And we will speak out in a different way from the Trump administration on issues of transition of power and good governance, generally speaking.
So, Chester, the United States has traditionally had a strong security focus on the African continent. Do you see that focus broadening to other diplomatic considerations like trade or governance issues?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. Security is always important to a leading security power like the United States, and I think you're not going to see the Biden administration pulling our troops out of Africa, as some voices in the Trump administration seemed inclined to do. We are a critically important partner to African states as well as to France and West Africa and the Sahel. And that region is very troubled and very fragile. And I don't think that we'll abandon it in security terms. What we will do, I'm sure, is try to broaden our response to the crises in the Sahel. So it's not just a military response, but also a governance response, because you can't fix the challenge of jihadi militancy in the Sahel by guns alone. You need to actually figure out what is the basis in terms of grievances and organizational capacity of different states to have a more effective response, and not just with guns, but it will include guns. So I want to be clear on that. We also have very important security relationships in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea region, which is a very unstable area with all kinds of competition between different African states, with Turkey playing an active role, the Gulf Emirates and Qatar playing an active role, Egypt and so forth. There's a lot of contention going on for influence in the Horn of Africa, and I think that will capture the attention of the Biden administration as well. But you mentioned governance, and I think it's quite likely that a new Biden administration would take the challenge of good governance more seriously than the Trump administration. It would be hard to take it less seriously than the Trump administration, which seemed to prefer relations with autocrats.
So Chester, during your time at the State Department, you played a critical role in brokering a peaceful negotiation between the then apartheid regime in South Africa, the Cubans, and the Angolan government as well. How do you see the US relationship with Southern Africa changing over the next 4 years? Do you see a step change in terms of the relationship with the various countries in the region?
I think it's clear that our relations in Southern Africa are a case by case, country by country, rather than on a kind of region-wide basis. But this is a region of our historic involvement that we played a key role in. And I think there's a kind of an investment there. We want to see the countries of the region succeed. And some of them are doing okay, and some of them are challenged. These are important relationships. And I should also underscore the point that there's going to be a very definite sense that Africa matters. I can't give you chapter and verse or give you numbers, but this incoming administration will take African issues significantly more seriously than the Trump administration has, and that includes in Southern Africa. So I would expect that there'd be an effort to work more closely with the leadership in South Africa, for example, to try to find ways to be constructive in our relations with countries such as Botswana and Zambia, to try to think through what can be done with the mess in Zimbabwe, how to be a good partner for Mozambique, which is a key country in the region. Mozambique has two sets of challenges, and I think we've been quietly behind the scenes playing a constructive role, as has South Africa. So I'm sure we would talk with our South African partners about Mozambique and talk to the Mozambicans themselves about what we could do in addition to try and help them respond to the challenge, especially in the north, in the northern part of Mozambique, which is threatened by the challenge of these homegrown jihadis who may be getting help from outside. On the other side, Namibia looks like it's doing okay. Angola is trying to get on its feet, but also has huge challenges because of debt and the low price of oil and so forth. So Africa is a big place, and anyone in charge of Africa policy, as I once was, needs to find a basis for choosing what are the issues that you spend a lot of time on. Now, for example, the DRC, Congo, is one of the most complex countries in Africa, a country that has seldom really been on its feet in a constructive way in terms of both governance and security. And even if we don't want to deal with the problems of DRC, we have to deal with the problems of DRC to some extent. You can't avoid them. There are 9 neighboring countries of the DRC, and it's a big place with a lot of people. But I suspect the most urgent early challenge could well be not in the DRC, but in Ethiopia, which is having very grave problems of security and governance right now as we speak. Let me stop there. I mean, there's lots more one could say.
Well, Chester, I'd like to ask you about US relations with South Africa specifically. In February of this year, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where he addressed the African Union, and he made some critical remarks around expropriation without compensation in South Africa, which he cautioned strongly against, saying that this would be a very bad idea to undermine property rights. So it seems that a bit of firm diplomatic actions like that can actually go a long way to preserving important democratic principles in many African countries. Do you think a Biden presidency would be a bit more forgiving of an ANC that is rapidly losing its way?
I think the issue of what the ANC is doing and what it is today is a very tough call for Americans to make from these thousands of miles away. The ANC, as you said, may in some respects be losing its way. On the other hand, the president of the country is somebody whose history and track record suggests that we would want to be supportive of what he's doing. President Ramaphosa is a major, I guess I could say, a founding father of his country, and he deserves our respect, and he should get our support. But he also needs to figure out who he is and what he's going to do, specifically on the challenge that you mentioned to do with expropriation and other issues, and that he has in the country. I don't envy President Ramaphosa. He's got a tough challenge. He's got very many different voices within the party, and so he's got to figure out how to play the role of leader that he would want to be remembered as. So, and he's got some very capable people at his side. He's got some strong members of his team, and he's got to figure out how to make this all come together. It's not unlike the challenge that Joe Biden has, actually. The Democratic Party, some people have joked about the Democratic Party in the United States that it's not an organized political party, it's a disorganized political party. So I think the new Democratic administration will be somewhat sympathetic with the problems that President Ramaphosa faces. But on the specific issue that you mentioned, I really couldn't predict where they will come out, whether they will be inclined to let the ANC do whatever it wants to do, or more likely to speak out and say, you know, there are basic principles at stake here. I personally would hope that the principles you mentioned would be respected, but I'm just a private citizen now.
Right. Well, Chester, thank you very much. For a private citizen, you certainly seem to know a hell of a lot about affairs on the African continent and more broadly in terms of US relations with the world. So just wanted to thank you very much for sharing your time and your perspective with us. That's it from me, David Ansara. If you enjoyed this content, please remember, do give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and also check out the link in the description below to our 30-day free trial. Until tomorrow at 7 a.m., take care.